Morning, welcome to Pensar Basketball Live, and today we are going to be talking about what the Toronto Raptors are trying to do. I think that the Toronto Raptors are trying to do three things. I think they're trying to build a sustainable winner. I think they're trying to build a sustainable culture. I think they're trying to build a sustainable business model. All three things must happen together. They will not happen overnight. But I hope today I can take you through a deep dive in terms of how teams have built throughout history, whether we look at the Golden State Warriors, Toronto Raptors. We can look at predictable trends. We can look at maybe some overlapping trends between the Bulls and the Pistons and the Spurs. We can look at teams that have done things correctly, teams that have gone all in for a championship and then suffered the consequences for 16 years. This is really about the bird's eye perspective on this. I think you're going to get a lot out of this live. First of all, before I start, I want to give a big shout out to Michael McElvey, an amazing YouTuber. I think you should follow him. And a few of the clips that I'm going to play from his last video, I think will be very telling in terms of, again, the bird's eye view on what you root for every single day, what you're cheering for. And like my last video was a little bit doom and gloom about the constraints and the board and the business. And I know that fans don't necessarily want to think that the product that they're rooting for on the court, the guy that they're rooting for, that all of this represents a business, but it does. But it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be a bad thing because the Miami Heat are a business, San Antonio Spurs are a business, the Golden State Warriors are a business, and certainly it's been a very fun business to root for. It is okay to accept that there is more to this than what we cheer for, and it's okay to know that. And it's also okay to realize that it's always going to be this way. And that doesn't mean that it's rigged. It doesn't mean that it's tainted. It doesn't mean anything. It just means it's real. All right. So let's get into it. First of all, I have a ton of slides prepared. I'm going to try to be as organized and as succinct as possible. But if I get a little bit lost sometimes, please understand that I'm doing this by myself. And doing this in a live format probably isn't the greatest idea. This probably should have been a 15 to 25-minute deep dive video, and it's going to turn into a 35-minute video with 10 minutes to spare while I sort of gather my thoughts. But I'm going to try to do this correctly, and I promise at the end of this video, you'll know a ton of things that you did not know about the Toronto Raptors and basketball business in general. So let's start. So the Toronto Raptors saw the biggest value gain, 25% of any NBA team after winning a championship. This is typically what happens when you win a championship in a bigger market, right? And look, a lot of people get rich when this happens. The players don't get rich. They're not equity owners. They don't own a stock in the Toronto Raptors, right? This has always been the gripe from the players. Like, we are creating the value. The Michael Jordan-led Chicago Bulls have forever changed the valuation of the Chicago Bulls brand. When you see a Chicago Bulls jersey, you're more likely to buy it because of nostalgia over a shot that Michael Jordan hit in 1997. That's just the way things go. That's business, right? When Michael Jordan puts on a pair of Nikes, you're more likely to buy Nike the next time you go around. And I'm even giving a shout out to Nike right now. Please sponsor me. I could use some money. But what I will say is that this element of it is often lost on the average fan, that this is ultimately a business. And I want to take a little look at two teams that I think that have a lot in common in the Golden State Warriors and the Toronto Raptors, two teams that squared off in the finals, two teams that really are hallmarks for team success over the last 10 years in pro basketball. And while they had different levels of success and the success was seen differently, I think there's a lot of parallels that you could draw between these two teams. So, for instance, look at the Golden State Warriors valuation. I mean, this is a team that was a laughing stock in 2003, and today is considered the beacon. I mean, they had an ownership shift in 2010, and we'll certainly talk about the ownership shifts for both teams. But ultimately, this is a team that nobody associated with winning. I mean, I've been an NBA fan for almost 30 years, and I can definitely tell you that when I was growing up, the Golden State Warriors were the laughing stock of the NBA. And today, they moved into a new arena. They've sort of shifted cities without ever shifting the name. And ultimately, it's a completely different brand. It's associated with Steph. It's associated with Clay. It's associated with Draymond. It's associated with championships. And so the brand is the players, it's the championships, it's the banners, it's the memories, it's the playoff runs, it's the playoff failures, it's KD, it's all of it. That's all a part of what goes into the valuation, because at the end of the day, the valuation is rooted in the interest. And let's be honest, if I gave you your pick right now, you can own any NBA team you want. I'm going to bet that the Golden State Warriors probably are within the top 5 picks. And I can guarantee you that maybe 25 years ago, they would be in the bottom 10 picks. And that's the difference. That's the valuation, because the valuation is dependent on interest. And right now, Joe Lacob, who bought this team for very little money, could probably sell it back for a pretty penny if, I mean, what was it? Hang on. Here comes the disorganization. So, I mean, he bought it. Wow. I mean, he bought it in 2010. There is a graphic at some point that is going to show exactly when he bought it. Here we go. So he bought it for $450 million. Yeah. It's worth, like, I think they'd sell for well over 2 billion today. So that's quite a rise. And the same thing can be said for the Toronto Raptors, right? The Toronto Raptors, in 2012, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, sold their 79% stake in the company for $1.32 billion to a joint venture between Rogers and Bell. And ultimately, this team is worth a hell of a lot more now after winning a championship, after the We the North, after the entire marketing, everything. So you have to understand, when you're talking about let's trade Fred, let's trade Pascal, from a basketball standpoint of getting a couple, second round picks or whatever you are thinking in your head, like, we got to trade Fred because we want a couple of, we want a couple of second round picks and an expiring contract. At least you'll feel better. That's your 2K version. That's your 2K fantasy basketball version of what is actually happening. What's really happening is that Fred VanVleet represents money. He represents money not only to himself, obviously, Mr. Entrepreneur, bet on yourself, but he also represents money to the Toronto Raptors. So does Pascal Siakam. I mentioned in yesterday's live that every action has a consequence or an opposite reaction. And at the end of the day, you cannot build up guys as next up without taking a hit when they're not next up. When they fail, you take a hit. If you build up right now, you build up Cade Cunningham as a superstar in Detroit. If you trade Cade Cunningham today for, I don't know, first round pick and some role players because you decide you've seen enough of 40% shooting and 29% three-point shooting and losing, if you decide to do that, there is such a cost to your fan base, to how your fan base feels. So at the end of the day, if you're looking to build a sustainable winner, don't hold your breath. No one has ever been able to do it. No one is able to completely overcome the little rut that does inevitably come at the cost of winning. And the Toronto Raptors would know that, right? So the Golden State Warriors and Toronto Raptors, as I mentioned, they have a lot in common, okay? They have a ton in common. This is the Golden State Warriors lineage of general managers. You'll notice that from Chris Mullin to Larry Riley to Bob Myers, that's a lot of people that have come in. They also had, of course, a coaching change, just like the Raptors. The Raptors went from Brian Colangelo to Masai Ujiri to Bobby Webster as general managers. Then I believe there was Jeff Weltman, stint in the middle as well. And again, all of those people contributed to winning. Brian Colangelo often is sort of just not talked about enough. He's the guy who brought in DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan is the guy you traded. If he drafts some other player, not DeMar DeRozan at 9th, you don't have that trade piece to inevitably trade for Kawhi. He's the one who traded a first-round pick for Kyle Lowry. He didn't trade 5 first-round picks. He didn't trade 3 first-round picks. We still owe Steve Nash a lot for not coming here because we got Kyle Lowry for that. This sustained momentum that's built over some period of time, right? We give credit to the last guy. We give credit to the championships to Bob Myers, but truly Bob Myers did not draft Klay Thompson. Bob Myers tried to trade Klay Thompson. Well, a little unknown, not unknown, but little celebrated fact is that there was a time when Bob Myers wanted to trade Klay Thompson for Kevin Love, and ultimately the deal was vetoed or nixed by Jerry West, who was a consultant for them at the time, I believe. And he basically said, I'll quit if you do this. I will not go with this. We also don't give enough credit to the coaches. We're talking about coaches like Mark Jackson and Dwayne Casey, guys who set the groundwork, guys who unlocked, guys who, set the culture, if you will. Right now, a lot of people still speak glowingly about Coach Casey, and a lot of Warriors players, still speak really glowingly about Mark Jackson. There's a reason for that. And that's because this continuation of building and building and building does not happen overnight. It took a lot of people. Some of them don't make it to the finish line. Some of the guys, Steph Curry almost got traded for something because they wanted to build around Monta Ellis. Thank God someone had the presence of mind to not do that, right? So at the end of the day, there's a lot of whoopsies, could have beens, would have beens, right? The Raptors almost traded Kyle Lowry to the New York Knicks. The Knicks backed out. You don't get We the North without Kyle Lowry. You certainly don't get a championship without Kyle Lowry. You don't get championship culture without Kyle Lowry. You probably end up being the laughingstock. So there's a lot of things that have to break your way. Some of them calculated, some of them not calculated. Some of them have to do with luck. Maybe, if DeMar DeRozan, touch wood, he had an Achilles tear or something. Now you can't trade him. So there's an element of luck. There's so many things that go into it, and we'll talk about that in the end. But I want to take you through this concept of building a sustainable winner. So take a look. And this is going to shock you. I think this is going to shock you. I think most Raptor fans don't realize this. Here are from day to day. Okay, today is November 23rd. From November 23rd, 2013 to November 23rd, 2023. Here are the winningest teams in the NBA. Are you a little proud as a Raptor fan? Things aren't going so well right now. You're 2 games under 500, but guess what? Over the last 10 years, you have bragging rights over just about every single team in the NBA that your team, your franchise, your city has hosted a winner. Now, you only have one championship to show for it. Okay. The Boston Celtics, over that span, I believe they only have one championship as well, right? So it's like the Milwaukee Bucks, they only have one championship as well. The LA Clippers, they have 0 championships. The Warriors have 4 championships. The Spurs have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think they have like 4 championships or 4 championships over that time. The Utah Jazz have 0. The OKC Thunder / Seattle Supersonics have 0. The Houston Rockets have 0. The Portland Trailblazers have 0. The Memphis Grizzlies have 0. The Indiana Pacers have 0. The Dallas Mavericks have 1, right? 1, yeah. And the Cleveland Cavaliers have 1, right? So at the end of the day, the Lakers are not on this list because the Lakers spent a lot of time being really, really bad in the middle of being really, really good. And you're not going to be the Lakers, or this is really the formula for the other 27 teams, right? I mean, some are better than others. Obviously, Phoenix is a bigger market than Indiana, and Toronto is a slightly bigger market, is definitely a bigger market than Minnesota. But you have to look at this from the perspective of like, how do you win when you're not LA and New York? Really, at the end of the day, the Knicks are always going to have a bit of a leg up on marketability, advertising dollars. They're always going to have a bit of a leg up in terms of valuation. They're always going to have a leg up in terms of attracting free agents. And so are the Lakers. But for everybody else, there has to be a different model. And I think there are certain teams that we could look at that have perfected that model, or at least come as close as possible. And we'll take a look at some of those. Now, what I've done here is I'm going to take you through a few years of, the past 25 years, Pistons, Kings, Spurs, Heat, and Celtics. I've bolded out the losing seasons. Now, you don't want to lose for too long. You definitely don't. You can do the 1-year Tampa tank that the Raptors did. You can even do 2 years, but you don't want to be losing for more than 2 years in a row, because the fans that were your fans, they go away. And then when you start winning again, you have to build it all back again. You just don't want to lose for too long. The Raptors have like one real losing season, which is Tampa, and that's why they are second on that list. The Warriors have a couple of losing seasons. These two teams, as I mentioned, have a ton in common, and we will definitely talk about what they have in common. But take a look at these teams. Now, the Pistons, they have a couple of championships in the early 90s, late 80s, and the early 90s. They had a couple of championships with Joe Dumars and Isaiah Thomas. Then they had an entire run with Grant Hill, and then they tried to, have Jerry Stackhouse. And look, things were not great for the Pistons, right? But then they had that championship run with Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, right? Chauncey Billups, Tayshaun Prince. That required a lot of really smart executive management. But then the executive management goes to shit. They start signing guys like Josh Smith and Ben Gordon and Charlie Villanueva. Shout outs to Charlie V. And ultimately, it leads to this. From 2008 to 2024, and trust me, this season will be no different. The Pistons have had exactly one winning season. And I promise you, no one in that fan base thought they were a contender in 2015, 2016 when they eked out 6 games over 500. This is a really, really, really bad franchise. Trust me, all those people from 2004, well, almost all those people from 2004 that were with the championship run, that were cheering for Chauncey, cheering for Rashid, cheering for, everything, those people are gone. A lot of those people are gone. At least the casuals are gone. They've turned to another sport. This is the casual fan base, right? Like you can't lose for too long because the casual fans turn away, your ticket dollars go down, your revenue goes down, your franchise valuation goes down. This is what MLSE does not want the Raptors to become again. And this is what the Raptors really were, if you think about it, between eras, right? Between the end of the Glenn Greenwald era to the, sort of like the middle of the Brian Colangelo era. Like this is what the Raptors haven't been. They have actually sustained success. Take a look at the Sacramento Kings. Holy hell. Once the beacon of being forward thinking and tapping into market inefficiencies, the Sacramento Kings really went through hell from 2005 all the way till 2022 last year. 2023 is their first winning season in a long time. I think they made the playoffs for the first time in 16 years. That's crazy. Now let's take a look at 3 better examples. Teams that didn't lose for too long, but currently, like look at the Spurs, right? Oh my gosh. Right from about 1997, 98, when they drafted Tim Duncan, all the way till 2019, the Spurs enjoyed probably the most honestly historic run of winning in any sports by any sports team ever. I'm willing to say that like pretty confidently. I mean, unless there's a baseball team that I'm not thinking about right now, but like most teams manage to be bad eventually. The Spurs managed to be good for a really long time until they hit, the DeMar DeRozan end of era DeMar DeRozan. And then they started to strip down and they started to tank and then they started to build up young assets and they started to tear away. But you'll realize that they continue to do things the right way for most part. They developed Derek White, they developed DeMar DeRozan, they developed Jakob Poeltl, they developed all these guys and then they traded them out. This is probably the closest thing to what the Raptors are trying to replicate. Another culture that I think the Raptors are really trying to replicate, and if you really want to think about, the funny thing, the Raptors have dealt with pretty much the Spurs and Heat exclusively. They traded Kyle Lowry. They got Precious Achiuwa from the Heat. They traded for Thaddeus Young and Jakob Poeltl from the Heat. They traded Kawhi Leonard from the Heat. From the Spurs. So these are the 2 teams that I think the Raptors are probably closest to and probably are the most likely to make deals with and probably have the closest knit relationships with, but also probably the 2 teams that the Raptors most want to model themselves after. The Miami Heat are really, really rare. I mean, they went from a contender around Alonzo Mourning when his health went to shit. They drafted, Dwayne Wade. They built a winner around him. They got to the playoffs. They signed, they traded for Shaquille O'Neal. Once again, how did they trade for Shaquille O'Neal? Well, they had Lamar Odom, Caron Butler. They had assets to trade for Shaquille O'Neal when he became available. They made that win now move. Lonzo Mourning comes back. They win another championship with Shaq. Then they turn the Heat, then they kind of turn the leaf over. They realize they're in a desirable destination, being in Miami. Then they get the Heatles. Then they have, 2010 to 2014 is like sustained winning. I mean, they have their winningest season of the bunch with 66 wins in 2013 behind LeBron, D Wade, etc. That results in 2 championships. Then they lose very briefly. And then, basically it's turning the leaf, right? Then they eventually turn it over to Jimmy Butler. And I mean, it's such a strange franchise because they don't ever lose for long. And you notice that their fan base appreciates that. There is a complete sustained effort to keep Eric Spoelstra in play. I mean, you'll notice Eric Spoelstra is one of the longest tenured coaches in the league. And, you know, that's organizational culture. And we'll talk about that in the end in terms of what the Raptors are trying to build here, hopefully with Darko Rajakovic long term. But I mean, very many times throughout this process, he could have been fired. And take a look at the final example, which is the Boston Celtics. I mean, the Boston Celtics were bad and they had this big 3. Then eventually, like they've built this whole thing around analytics. They're very far ahead of the curve. They've had, various draft picks that haven't worked out, but the vast majority of their draft picks have worked out. They've been really, really smart. they had probably the best executive in the NBA, and they've turned him over to, and when he left, Danny Ainge, when he left, he turned the page over to one of the other best executives in the NBA. So this is just, in Brad Stevens. So this is what, high intelligence and ownership integrity gets you. It gets you a sustained winner. The Boston Celtics and the Lakers are often compared, but man, they shouldn't be. The Boston Celtics have not been the recipients of people just choosing to randomly play there like LeBron. You know what I mean? They're not the recipients of people just forcing their way to get traded there like Shaq. Um, or I mean, signing there like Shaq. I mean, look, consider the Lakers' success over the last, 25 years, and you'll notice there's two really, really big free agent signings, and there's a few really, really lopsided trades that probably shouldn't have happened, and then there's like a couple of really, really smart draft picks. But I mean, in all honesty, the Celtics are one of the most model organizations in the NBA for how they do pretty much everything, from how they hire to how they operate to how they manage to how they draft. Everything that this organization does is top flight, top tier. So ultimately, to make it very, very simple, if you're an organization, winning equals money and losing equals less money. And that's always been the case. And that's Michael McElvey. So I will play you a few clips from his thing. But in order to understand like how the Raptors got here, I just want to point out to a few parallels between the Raptors and Warriors and just how this has happened and what is the cost of winning, because there is a tremendous cost of winning. You could look at any franchise that's won, whether it be the Pistons with Rasheed and Ben Wallace, etc. I mean, it's not easy to just trade away the heroes, right? Because fans have come to associate the winning with the people that did the winning on the basketball court. You know, there was definitely offers for Scottie Pippen in 1997, 1998, when they knew that it was ending. They ended up giving that Bulls team a final chance because I think there was a lot of internal pressure from ownership to do that. But man, they really, really wanted to trade those guys. They wanted to trade Scottie Pippen. There was just a lot of pressure that you can't right now, because it's just part of the valuation. We have to think about this. I think there was a trade, Scottie Pippen for Tracy McGrady, that almost happened. Yeah, Scottie Pippen almost became a Raptor. So, I mean, stuff like this has to be considered all around. And I think for Raptor fans who want to see another example of a team that was kind of where they were, but just a lot better and achieved what they did, kind of how they did it, but again, 4 championships to 1 championship, I think it'd be really great to look at the Golden State Warriors. For a really long time, I think their ownership group, or their owner, Joe Lacob, he came out and he said, we're 10 years ahead of everybody. And I think people batted an eye at it, but I don't think anyone could disagree. They were at the head of the analytics revolution with threes. I mean, honestly, not completely at the head of it, I think, but they really capitalized on it with great shooters. When they eventually almost traded, Klay Thompson, they were going to trade him for another guy who was shooting really, really well at the time, which was Kevin Love. And they were going to pretty much try to do the whole thing, but just with a different piece. But at the end of the day, this is a very analytics driven organization. When you look at the people, the scouts, their coaches, everyone is very, very pro forward thinking basketball. And Steve Kerr was the perfect coach to come in for Mark Jackson and sort of replace him and carry them to the next level. And they did this through tapping into market inefficiencies. They did this through really drafting well. I mean, Klay Thompson was, I believe, an 11th pick. Steph Curry was a 7th pick. They didn't get like a number 1 overall pick like the Spurs did with Victor Wembanyama and Tim Duncan. They didn't get like some major free agent signing until later, when they built a sustainable culture with Kevin Durant. But I think there are some parallels between the Raptors and the Warriors. Consider the following. Number one, obviously, the obvious parallel is that they are the two winningest teams over the last 10 years. But also, how did they win? Well, they built an entire identity and a culture around a point guard. And for the case Raptors, was a slightly older point guard in Kyle Lowry. In the case of, the Warriors, it was Steph Curry. And then they started surrounding that player with pieces that they could win with, right? So, I mean, in the case of Steph, I mean, you have Klay, you have Draymond, you have a lot of smart drafting, you have Sean Livingston, you have Andre Iguodala, you have a lot of these pieces come in. Man, the Raptors are like looking over and copying their homework, right? Because they have DeMar DeRozan, and they have, Terrence Ross, Serge Ibaka eventually replaces him. There's a lot of smart roster building around, and they draft like really well in OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam and Norman Powell. Like they're drafting late and they're doing really well. And for a really long time, it really felt nice to hear that the Raptors and the Warriors really were the teams that everyone should be looking to emulate, because they were the teams that were super great at drafting. They were great at drafting late. They were great at scouting in the second round. They were great at development. They had great cultures. Their culture was winning. They had this really vibes culture, and it was really awesome. And then eventually both teams suffered a major loss. And in the case of the Raptors, it was the Cleveland Cavaliers series. And in the case of the Warriors, it was also the Cleveland Cavaliers series. So LeBron basically ended both. If you ever want an image in your head of how great he is, he pretty much ended both trains of thought. And then both teams decided to do the exact same thing, which is they ended up trying to get a massive insurance policy on winning. In the Raptors case, they disrupted their culture. They kind of rerouted their thought process. They disrupted all the good vibes, and they took a swing on Kawhi Leonard. In a lot of ways, Kawhi Leonard was not from their culture. He was from a completely different culture in the San Antonio Spurs, but they felt, close enough, right? And he's the best player we can possibly get. And he's one of the top 3 players in the NBA, and he's going to be able to deliver us at least 1 or 2 championships. And I think the Golden State Warriors pretty much had the exact same thought about Kevin Durant. But ultimately, when Kevin Durant came in and when Kawhi Leonard came into their respective situations, you can feel the entire shift of the culture changed from this is a team that just did it organically to this is a team that has done it through this guy. Because in both cases, those guys came in and became the number 1 option. Does that make sense? It's like an organization that kind of grows in the grassroots, and they build up their culture and they promote from within. And then suddenly they hire this like super duper expensive Google executive to come in and manage all of them. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And in the both cases, when Kawhi left, when KD left, I feel like the culture would never be the same in both cases, right? And I think you can look at the dysfunction that existed in the Warriors locker room, and it's far cry to say the Warriors won a championship 2 years ago. Like, it's not like they're washed or anything, but you can feel the decline, right? Their scouting hasn't been the same. They drafted James Wiseman. They wouldn't have drafted James Wiseman 10 years ago, right? We can agree that they didn't have misses like this 10 years ago. They were batting pretty much 100. They had $80 million in luxury tax payments for Kelly Oubre. That did not work out. They had Jordan Poole. That was a guy they drafted 28th overall. He's been shipped out. He got punched in the face by Draymond, one of their leaders. I mean, what I'm describing here is TMZ world star hip hop. And what I was describing with the Raptors last year, all year on this podcast, was also that. It was very dysfunctional. Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam at odds, with their younger teammates, Masai Ujiri and Nick Nurse at odds. All of this stuff just wasn't there under Dwayne Casey. It wasn't there under DeMar DeRozan. It wasn't this present. There were always, some disagreements. I'm sure Draymond and Steph have had disagreements, but it didn't get full blown. It didn't become this distracting. It didn't become this big a problem until they decided to bring in these guys. And then ultimately, now we have seen the decline. We have seen losing seasons for both teams. We have seen tanking seasons for both teams. And the only difference, really, in my opinion, is that the Raptors have drafted better than the Warriors. And so right now, whereby, okay, that's the one pro for the Raptors, and the pro for the Warriors is their Kyle Lowry is still really, really, really good in Steph Curry. But if Steph Curry was not great right now, that team would be one of the worst teams in the NBA. Let's be factual about that. It's just 100% true, right? I mean, Steph Curry is the only thing holding that team up from being like a 25-win team this year. And he'll single-handedly probably push them into the play-in. But things are not looking good right now for the Golden State Warriors. And for good reason. It's because the youth that they had drafted to finally implement and change their, to carry the torch hasn't worked out. Jonathan Kuminga hasn't worked out. James Wiseman is gone. Moses Moody kind of not really very good. These guys are all lottery picks. Those are 3 lottery picks that I just described. It hasn't worked out, right? Chris Paul, I mean, to be seen, but he's 38 years old. So there's a lot of that, right? Andrew Wiggins, right? He's okay, I guess, right? The Jonathan Kuminga thing hasn't really worked out. Like, I mean, imagine how different that team's future would be if Jonathan Kuminga was not Jonathan Kuminga, but rather Jonathan Kuminga was Scotty Barnes. I mean, this would be like, okay, we have a clear torch to pass. We have a clear franchise guy. He's coming up next. They don't have that. They don't have that. They don't have the greatest pick equity. They have a really rich owner who's willing to spend. They're in a new market that's pretty decent. They have a good franchise valuation. But imagine right now the cost of trading Steph. I mean, you're losing. He's getting older. He's probably going to keep losing. He's probably going to keep losing burst. Next year, he's not going to be able to elevate you by 20 wins. Maybe he'll be able to elevate you by 10 wins. Why do you not trade Steph? Is it just PR? Is it the franchise valuation? Is it that by trading this guy, you ruin everything you built? That the financial cost of trading a Steph Curry would be so tremendously immense. Okay, forget about Steph Curry. What about Klay Thompson? I mean, Bob Myers basically quit as a general manager, probably to avoid having to do what someone is going to have to do right now, Mike Dunleavy, which is they're going to have to trade Klay at some point. He is really bad right now, and he's getting worse, and he wants a max contract. Draymond, well, jeez. You draft a guy in the second round, you build him up, you give him a role that optimizes him, minimizes his weaknesses. He's perfectly unlocked by that roster, and he's haggling over so much money because he feels like he doesn't get his due. He feels like he didn't get his due credit. He feels like he's getting clowned on, and he feels like, hey, man, you want me to take what? You want me to take a pay cut? No, 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 no. I deserve because I built this. These players know what they're doing. Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, Kyle Lowry, all these guys, they were part of a team that went onto the basketball court and resulted in this. A 25% uptick in evaluation of a team is like, I mean, it's close to $1 billion. It's a far cry from, I want $5 million more next year. Okay, let's just put it that way. And those players receive none of that money. None. It will be washed down and passed down from executive to their family, to their family, to their family. Pascal Siakam is not related to Larry Tannenbaum. They don't get that money. Masai Ujiri, his next deal, it included, a bonus, I guess, for team success. There's a lot of money at stake here. And guys like Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and Steph Curry have built billions of dollars of equity for people that are not them. They have built billions of dollars of equity for, people who are not their family. The reverse side of this, obviously, is that if you're a greeter at Walmart who makes $11 to $12 to $14 an hour, and you do a great job at greeting, and the job you do at greeting results in some fantastic business collaboration between Walmart and somebody, because the person who came in, who was a multi-trillion, billionaire, decided to invest something in Walmart and invest his products in Walmart because he was so blown away by the service that he got from this $14 an hour greeter. Does the $14 an hour greeter deserve a cut of that deal because they had it? See, that might be a terrible example, but the truth is that every employee agrees that there is a potential cost benefit to their salary or their income or their wage, right? So at the end of the day, whether I work, security, or whether I work, retail, whether I work as a player or whatever, whether I do this for whoever I do this. Sorry, my dog is barking. Can you please stop? I think my girlfriend just left for work, so he's barking. Let me retrace my thoughts here. That happened in the last live too. He's going nuts. I've completely lost my train of thought. I apologize. Can someone remind me where I was? Right. So the equity that you build up for these organizations is not yours to keep. And so Fred VanVleet feeling like, I built this championship, right? I built, I was a part of it. I played hurt. I played through pain. I defended, Steph Curry. If I don't do that, you guys don't have this, uptick in merchandise sales, etc. At the end of the day, players are always going to feel like they're getting shafted. No matter how much money you're going to pay them, you can pay them, like what they used to pay people in Michael Jordan's day of like, $500,000. There's always going to be that. If you want a really, really, really good example of this, Look at the LSU Iowa, last year. I mean, I'm sure y'all watched it, or some of you watched it. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, right? Angel Reese blows up for doing the, John Cena, you don't see me thing, right? She becomes bigger than life. Her NIL deal is huge. She's making more money in college through NIL deals than most WNBA players. In fact, I checked. She's making more than some of the best WNBA players. She made over $1 million. She has 2.1 or 2.9 million followers on Instagram. Just to put that into perspective, Scotty Barnes won Rookie of the Year in the NBA, and he doesn't have 1 million followers. He plays in Toronto. He plays for the Toronto Raptors, a pro basketball team. She won a college championship and did this to Caitlin Clark, and she has 3 times as many followers as Scotty Barnes. What does that tell you? That tells you that she's about to feel like she's bigger than the team. And that's exactly what's happening this year. If you've been following Angel Reese and LSU, and I'm not taking sides, I'm not saying like who's right or wrong or whatever, she can fucking do whatever she wants. I don't care. She's a professional, sorry, professional. She's a student, but like now her mom and Flage's mom are beefing and all that stuff. And it's like, it's drama, but the drama came from what? The drama came from winning and who deserves what for the win, right? Now Kawhi leaves, right? So Pascal and Fred are like, yo, handshake. This is our team now. So you're going to draft a guy like Scotty Barnes who had nothing to do with that winning. You're going to draft, Grady Dick. He didn't have anything to do with that winning last I checked. And now you're going to try to push Pascal out the door. Well, he can't leverage the championship with Indiana, right? Robert Horry is a hero in LA because he won a championship for LA. He's a hero in Houston because he won a championship in Houston. And he's a hero in San Antonio. But if Robert Horry gets traded to Charlotte, he's just Robert Horry. There is a lot vested for Pascal Siakam as a brand to stay in Toronto. That's something that people don't talk about enough. Same thing with Fred VanVleet. Fred VanVleet won a championship with the Toronto Raptors. He deserved to win a championship with the Toronto Raptors. And so his feeling was, we're next up. OG Anunoby was not part of that championship team. Technically he was, but he didn't play in the playoffs. Have you ever noticed how the media never talks about OG? They always have to remember that he exists when they're talking about Fred and Pascal. That championship resulted in not only a ton of money for MLSE, a ton of money for Masai, a ton of money for Nick Nurse, by the way, who renegotiated his contract almost immediately after, a ton of money for Fred VanVleet, a ton of money for Kawhi Leonard, who got, the New Balance deal. Champions make money. This is absolutely how it works. It's how it's always worked. Draymond Green, not on the Golden State Warriors, probably does not get this much money throughout his career. But he's not happy because he's looking at his paycheck and he's looking at Joe Lacob's paycheck and he's saying those are not similar numbers. So I want more. Klay Thompson says he needs a legacy deal because he participated in the championship. So the question is, okay, replace Klay Thompson with some other guy. Do you still win championships? What if they had made the Klay Thompson and Kevin Love deal? Do you still win championships? Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. Maybe you win more. I have no idea. Okay. At the end of the day, maybe if Klay Thompson was DeMar DeRozan, you don't win championships or you win more championships. Klay can't tell me that. He can't guarantee me that. Right? He's never been analytically one of the 20 best players in the NBA, but he does get a lot of benefit from being in that situation with Steph Curry. And so does Draymond. I will actually argue that Draymond has been the second best player in the Warriors dynasty. And no, obviously KD, but apart from KD, among those three, I would rank it Steph, Draymond, Klay. Klay has gone through injury after injury, torn Achilles, ACL, and he's come back from that. And he is not the same player. What do you owe him? What do you owe him? Tie it back to the Toronto Raptors. What do the Toronto Raptors owe to Pascal Siakam? And what did they owe to Fred VanVleet? Did they owe Fred VanVleet at least the courtesy to not trade him to a team he didn't want to play for 30 games because he won a championship? Probably. Did they owe for a second round pick? Probably. You probably don't agree with that, but trust me, from a business perspective, I get it completely. Did they owe Kyle Lowry the courtesy to not just float him around for trade talks when the season was clearly over, to just give him like the benefit of just shutting it down? Is that worth maybe salvaging a first round pick? Sure. Yeah. He's the greatest player in your franchise's history, so you say. And you want to preserve that. You don't want to see the greatest player, traded to Indiana for a first round pick and some stuff. At the end of the day, you, the fans, are the reason that these deals can't be done. You want the truth? That's the truth. You, the fans, are the reason that Klay Thompson cannot be traded right now. You, the fans. You evolve, they'll change. But until you evolve, they can't change. Because right now, there are still some diehards who swear that Klay Thompson will come back to normal, that he will be okay. They're not looking at the analytics. There are still some diehards that think that, hey man, if you trade Steph Curry right now, the Warriors are done. And I get it. I get it from a purely emotional, what he's meant to your franchise thing. But right now, you could probably trade Steph Curry for like 6 first-round picks and like 2 good young players to a team that's desperate enough to salvage their entire future to still get one of the top 5 players in the NBA. And he is probably still going to be good for a couple of years. But you don't have the pieces around him. You don't. And you're salvaging and you're trying to trade for Chris Paul. You're trading Jordan Poole for Chris Paul. Now, Jordan Poole may be completely a terrible player, but Chris Paul's 38 years old. And you're just praying to extend this a little bit more. Why? Because you need to give Steph a chance. It's very similar. You need to give Kyle a chance. You need to give Pascal a chance. You need to give Fred a chance. This is the cost of championships. If you want my honest opinion, this is the cost of championships. Okay. Let's talk about the 5 steps to building what the Raptors are trying to build. Number 1, an analytics advantage on market inefficiency. Number 2, the right leaders. Number 3, organizational flow of control. Number 4, superstar. Number 5, time. And I'll give you a bonus. Number 6, luck. Okay. Now I want to turn over to a couple of clips from Michael McElvee's video, and I'll just give you my quick thoughts on it. But I think he's laid it out so beautifully in terms of what the Raptors are up against and what they're trying to do. And this will set up perfectly to my conversation on how the Raptors can build a 10-year winner again, and how and what market inefficiencies they can tap into to eventually make sure that this next era of Raptors basketball isn't we're the second winningest team with 1 championship, but rather we were the second winningest team with 4 championships. How can we go to that next level as an organization? How can Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster, Darko Rajakovic, Scotty Barnes, anyone who's going to be a part of this next wave, how can they properly do this? Okay, so let's turn it over to Michael. I think he's just a brilliant YouTuber, and shout outs to him, man.
Push away star players. NBA players wouldn't be able to handle that type of system. But here's a clip from Draymond that kind of contradicts this.
Steve came in. I'm watching Steph Curry going to mixing someone. He's like, pass the ball, pass the ball. I'm like, yo. And sure enough, as we bought into the system that he was bringing to it, it always found the guys that it needed to find.
So this is Draymond talking about the shift from Mark Jackson, in this case, Dwayne Casey, or you could look at it also as Nick Nurse, and moving towards a more analytically driven, more Spurs style system, which is exactly what Darko Rajakovic is preaching.
Simultaneously, it is an opportunity. There appear to be 3 markets where a player's ego or personal desires will not trump a coach: San Antonio, Golden State, and Miami. I find the Miami example particularly interesting. It's easy to forget the back and forth heat years after LeBron left, in and out of the playoffs, yet Spoelstra wasn't fired. It would have been an easy story for Pat Riley to tell, perhaps the easiest there ever was. We only won because LeBron, D-Wade, Chris Bosh was good too. But Riley had a unique patience for a GM, and Spoelstra went on to construct and implement a system with seemingly less talented, less valued guys overachieving their way into 2 finals runs. Unquestionably, Eric Spoelstra is allowed to coach. He has no fear of checking even his best players, but this is the exception. It is not the rule. The rule appears to be, well, back to our board.
Okay, So I've talked a lot about how I feel Darko Rakovic is not allowed to coach this team the way he wants to coach it, that he must finesse egos, favors, contracts, orders from above, trade values, etc. This is the life of an NBA coach that is not Greg Popovich, Eric Spoelstra, or I guess to anyone who doesn't have that sort of coherence from the top down, right? So when I talk about organizational flow of control, this is exactly it. Pat Riley and Eric Spoelstra are on the same page. RC Buford and Greg Popovich are on the same page. They have wine together every week. They are building and they see basketball in a similar way. When you look at this chart, these are all guys who have won Coach of the Year very recently, and 3 of them have been fired, right? So you have to look at that and just say, like, this is where we are as a culture. There's no patience for this. And coaches are going to be the first thing to go because at the end of the day, the fans are demanding change, demanding change. You need to sell change in order to boost your ticket sales. And so the easiest thing to say is, we fired this coach. Did the Raptors fire Nick Nurse because they were looking for a scapegoat? I don't think so. A lot of people have said that, but I don't think so. I think they fired him because they realized that this is important. Now let's talk about market inefficiencies, but first let's go to the final video just about like what a coach is under. I want to create a little bit more understanding and empathy for what Darko Rakovic is really up against.
Hire coaching staff. Similar stories can be easily found. Now, coaches get fired all the time. There are obviously bad coaches, but how is it that a coach can be valuable? What is it that they can do? Well, one of the things they can do is implement an offensive and defensive system, and coaches need to have some combination of authority and respect to do that. So why don't we just examine an NBA coach's authority or leash? If at any point you upset a star, your job is in jeopardy. If your team shows any signs of stepping back, your job is in jeopardy. If your team gets hurt, your job is in jeopardy. Even if your team won more games than any other team that season and you were named the coach of the year the prior season, you just had playoff injuries, your job is in jeopardy.
That's it. That's exactly it. To those of you who are asking for Masai Ujiri to be gone, for Bobby Webster to be gone, please understand that this is what you're really up against. 25 out of 30 teams operate pretty much this way. They operate under the "what have you done for me lately" camp. They operate under the "treat players like crap" camp. Drew Holiday did not get a text from the Bucks that he was being traded. Giannis wipes away a lot of what the Bucks are as an organization and who they are as an organization. But please understand that there's nothing good about that. Drew Holiday won a championship with the Bucks. They traded him away like he was nothing because they had Dame Lillard in their crosshairs. The Toronto Raptors have integrity on their minds. And I know a lot of people laugh that off, but I think it's really important because when you operate without integrity, you impact culture. And when you impact culture, you impact everything. So let's take a little while to just figure out. Hold on, let me just 1 sec. Is this the right graphic? So let's talk about the 5 steps. And we'll talk about analytics advantage last. But the first thing is let's talk about the right leaders and organizational flow of control. You need to have people who are good people in your organization. I hate to say it, but it's true. There's a lot of things that happen within, the course of a year to a person that could be scandalous, that could be, inflammatory. If you have a person who doesn't manage their emotions particularly well, maybe at the wrong time, at the wrong place, something they do is going to massively, massively disrupt your title odds. Draymond Green, pretty much, right? Every single year, Draymond Green, Rasheed Wallace, love him, but, guys like that, people who can't control their emotions, people who generally, and I'm not saying Draymond or Rasheed Wallace are not good people, but ultimately there have been people who are not very good people who have also disrupted organizational flow. And so you need the right people in place. You need coaches who understand their players, who players can relate to. You need a general manager who really understands the trends of the NBA, has the patience. It is hard to find these people. They are not cheap. They are not easy to find. They are exceedingly rare. And even the best teams sometimes happen to operate without at least one of these things, right? Let's talk about the organizational flow of culture. That sort of nice little, the coach is on one page and the GM, organization, etc., on the same page. And in order for this to happen, both people must be allowed to do their job, but also in order for both people to do their job, there must be trust. So if I'm a coach and I don't trust my general manager and I don't trust that they're telling me the truth when they tell me this 13th overall pick, Grady Dick, is going to be a really, really good player, if I'm not on board, if I'm not bought in, if I don't trust them, then it's not going to work. And if I'm a general manager and I'm trusting my coach to develop this guy, and that trust is not there, as it probably wasn't for Nick Nurse by the end, that's not going to work either, because I can do all the drafting and all the scouting. It's just like, within the organization, a scout is going to have a lot more vested interest in doing a great job when they know that their scouting is taken seriously. How many scouts do you think probably have been overridden by an owner? Like Vivek Ranadive is a great example in Sacramento of a person who just completely ruined culture. The Kings were a fantastic culture before, the Maloofs sold off. And then, boom, you had Vivek Ranadive and you had a meddling owner. The Raptors had Richard Petty, and he was a meddling, executive. It happens. Culture can go away so fast. You lost Vince Carter, you lost Tracy McGrady. You drafted so well. Your scouts did an incredible job. Your general manager did an incredible job. Your players did an incredible job. Vince and Tracy worked really hard to get better, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered because your ownership sucked, right? You need it all to line up. The Warriors have had it all line up for a long time, but ultimately everyone, even the mighty, do fall, right? As we showed here, the Spurs have fallen, right? They had bad luck. Kawhi steps on, or Zaza Pachulia goes under Kawhi's leg. And if that thing doesn't happen, maybe Kawhi stays. Maybe Kawhi's there right now winning championships. Maybe they were able to build. And look, the flow didn't change. RC Buford didn't completely forget how to draft. Jeremy Sohan worked. Maybe Josh Primo didn't. But they have Devin Vassell. They have Keldon Johnson. They drafted well, right? For the most part, they drafted rotation players at the end of the first round. They drafted DeJounte Murray, 28th. Guess what? They drafted, I think, 15 years prior to that, they drafted Tony Parker, 28th. They got 2 All-Stars at 28. This thing works. And if you're not a market like LA or New York, you need to build this way. You need to build with smart scouting. You need to build with good management. You need to build with good coaching. You need to build with organizational flow and culture, right? That goes right through. And culture starts with your leaders. Who are your leaders, right? For the Raptors, I think your leaders in place, between Dwayne Casey, Kyle Lowry, Kyle Lowry leading the team, DeMar DeRozan leading the team. So that's your front-facing leaders, and on the court. Then you have your leadership, which is Dwayne Casey. Then you have Masai Ujiri, Jeff Weltman, Bobby Webster, whoever. Then you have MLSE. So MLSE decided to butt out. They gave Masai Ujiri a little bit of, hey, they butt out because of Tim Lewicki. He was also a leader. So when you had We the North, you had everything clicked. Everything clicked other than Rudy Gay, who you shipped out, and then it all clicked together, right? You had one piece that was missing. So you had Tim Lewicki, perfect. Brian Colangelo was gone, perfect. You installed Masai Ujiri. He's a good executive. He knows what he's doing. Perfect. You had Dwayne Casey, perfect culture implementation development coach. Perfect. You had good assistants, good scouts across the board. Perfect. You had DeMar, Kyle on the court. Perfect. Congratulations. We the North. We the North. When Kawhi left, you retained it because you still had a lot of it left. You still had Marc Gasol, you still had Serge Ibaka, you still had, guys, you still had Kyle Lowry. But when Kyle Lowry left, it all left with him. It's never been the same, and it's never going to be the same. And I think for Raptor fans, I think you can just pour one out. You don't need to light jerseys on fire or anything like that. I think you just need to accept that this is the turning of a leaf. You cannot continue to nostalgically pound your drum on, we won a championship with these guys. We won a championship. The guys that you won a championship with are here. The guys that you won a championship because of are gone. They're gone. They've been gone for a while. Pascal Siakam was not a leader on that championship team. Fred VanVleet was not a leader on that championship team. They may see themselves as leaders today, but I can tell you right now, you replace them with like really, really high level, role player, starters, and you probably still win a championship. They weren't the difference. They made a difference. They weren't the difference. But because the guys who were the difference left or were too old, they got the credit. It was a group project. Okay. You ever did a group project? Perfect. You did a group project. Okay. We all have a person in a group project who ends up doing like 20% of the work, right? Perfect. And, if it's a 10-person group project, the person doing 20% of the work, i.e. Kawhi Leonard, that person deserves a lot of credit for how that group project turns out. If it results in a championship, if the group project the Raptors did in 2018, 2019 was win a championship, well, then that group project honestly was authored mostly by Kawhi Leonard. You can certainly say that the culture that resulted in the championship was really primarily built by Dwayne Casey, Jama Malalela, Nick Nurse, et cetera, et cetera. But when those guys left, it was just Nick Nurse holding his big NN hat, right? So at the end of the day, the coaching, the GM stuff, Jeff Weltman was a part of that championship team. He was, gone by the time we won it, right? I think he left the year after or the year before. He left the year before. So at the end of the day, a lot of people get credit for the work that a lot more people did. And the more of those people leave, the fewer those people are left to credit. So let's just say that, I don't know, tomorrow you invent the cure to cancer with 10 people, right? Okay, this is going to be crazy, but try to bear with me for a second. You invent the cure to cancer with 10 people. Okay, you and 10 people, you and 9 other people. So you are widely celebrated in newspapers, etc. But then 5 of your people, that helped you were really old and they die. So now there's just 5 people. So every single time you do a tour of the people that invented cancer or invented the cure to cancer, you're now going to press conferences without the 5 people who've died. Now, let's just say 2 people get indicted for some sort of, malpractice, and now you're down to 3 people. I guarantee you within 15 years, whether you did 2% of the work on that research, whether you did 1% of the work on that research, you will get a disproportionate amount of credit because you have decided to stay alive and out of jail long enough to outlast the people who didn't. Kawhi Leonard left. Had he stayed, all of the emotion, all of the thanks and gratitude and credit and everything you've been bestowing incorrectly on Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam would have gone to him almost disproportionately. He would have been your savior. He was the guy who hit the shot. He's the guy who played hurt. He's the guy who had the greatest playoff run of his life. He's the guy who decided to play. My God, like it's not even close, right? But now you're clinging to scraps. You're clinging to what Pascal Siakam did in game 1. You're clinging to one Finals MVP vote for Fred VanVleet. And believe it or not, that's enough to build a myth and a legend on. Do you know why? Because at the end of the day, the other guys are gone. They're dead and gone. They're not dead, but they're gone. Kyle Lowry's in Miami. He's gone. Dwayne Casey, he's gone. DeMar DeRozan, he's gone. Serge Ibaka, he's gone. He's out of the league. All these dudes are gone. And the only guy remaining is Pascal Siakam. And every single time one person left, all of the people that are thankful for the championship, nostalgic about the championship, holding their championship banners, holding their championship shirts, etc., are going to ultimately give credit to the one person who was there. All of the Scotty, needs to wait his turn people, Jack Armstrong, I'm talking about you, media, I'm talking about you, Will Liu, all these people that think you cannot, whatever, all of you people are basically ascribing something that Kawhi Leonard did, not by himself, but some of the credit of what you would give to Kawhi if he were here, you're giving to Pascal. And you're not even thinking critically that if Scotty was in place of Pascal, if this version of Scotty right now, 22-year-old Scotty was in place of 24-year-old Pascal, you probably don't need a game 7 to beat the Sixers because you're better. Because Scotty Barnes right now is much better than Pascal Siakam was when he was 24. But you don't want to think about that. You don't want to think that the player that you're choosing over the player that you're not choosing is actually better than the player you remember, who hasn't gotten too much better since that point. I don't think people want to think about that because that kind of disrupts their thought pattern. So let's just not keep this too negative and let's just try to get out the way of what the Raptors can do and how the Raptors really can create the 10-year vision. Organizational flow of culture, superstar, time, luck. Okay, you're going to need some time. Scotty Barnes is 22. OG Anunoby is 26. Grady Dick is 19, 20 now. Just turned 20 3 days ago. So you're going to need some time. You're 2 games under 500 or 1 game under 500 right now. And ultimately, you are facing the Chicago Bulls tonight. So maybe, just maybe by the time you watch this video, we will have beat the Chicago Bulls, and we are a 500 team with a max player, two-time All-NBA guy, who's kind of slowly been dangled, but is slowly turning his season around. And maybe he stays, maybe he goes, maybe there's, maybe at the end of the year, Bobby Webster's like, how could you trade an NBA champion? I don't know. Whatever it is, right? At the end of the day, you have a chance to make the playoffs, and I don't need to remind you again, do I? Money, winning equals money. And the Raptors want to have this like storybook, kind of graceful. Pascal Siakam fades into the background. Scotty Barnes takes the reins. They want to have this story, right? They want to have that storyline. They don't want to have we traded away Siakam, we traded away Fred, we built a lottery team now, because they have seen what happens to the valuation of teams that do this. And the media don't want you to do this, because they have seen what happens to the analytics and the viewership and the listeners and the numbers for teams that do this as well, right? I'll guarantee you right now, if this team decides to parse down, if they decide to trade Pascal Siakam for 2 future first round picks and total scrap contracts, I guarantee you that viewership will go down for this team. But enthusiasm and overall may go up. And I think if they start to win, you will actually get more viewership. Does that make sense? I'm kind of deviating again from the point because I'm rambling, but I just want to say the two options here. If you trade Siakam and start losing, I guarantee your views will for sure go down, right? There will be a lot of people that's like, I'm not watching this. And if it looks bad and it looks bad on the court, the product looks bad, you're gonna lose a lot of people. But I think if you traded Siakam and you got better, you would actually get more people invested in this than you've had in years, I think. Because I think most people can realize that the people they most accredit that championship for, Kawhi and Kyle Lowry, are gone. I think they can pretty much figure that out, right? It's the casual fan. It's the casual fan that associates. So I think that you're going to need some time, because Scotty's 22 and he's probably not ready to lead a championship team right now. And I don't really think that most fans, like most intelligent fans, even if Siakam comes out and scores 50 points per game over the next 2 weeks and the Raptors win every single game, I don't think most fans are just ready to be like, okay, we have something here. We can win a championship with Siakam as our number one guy. I think that boat has sort of sailed. I think there's been enough playoff failures and enough, fourth quarter meltdowns, and enough time has passed that we kind of have an idea of what this guy is at this point. And so I think that if you really want to sell hope, right? If you want to sell the hope of the future, I think people can get behind that. And I genuinely believe that if they did trade Siakam, they might see more of a pop on business if it goes well than if they continue to stay with Siakam and they play well. My point is, a 47-win team with Scotty at the helm and Siakam gone and young players is going to be a lot more popular, in my opinion, with the fans than a 47-win team with Pascal Siakam as its leading scorer. I am willing to bet a lot on that, actually. I'm pretty confident. You can let me know in the comments below if you think that's true, but I certainly think that's true. So you're going to need that. You're going to need time. You're going to need a superstar. Do we have a superstar? I think we do. It's conclusive. You certainly can let me know in the comments if you think Scotty's going to be a superstar, or Scotty is a superstar, or if Scotty's an ascending superstar. But honestly, through the first 7 games, he was an 8 bucks plus minus. He's strung together a consistency of great games. I know people are a little bit worried about the slumping, but dude, there is a far cry from slumping with 5 points, 3 rebounds last year. And this year, his slump is 20 points, 11, 12 rebounds, and 4 steals. This is a type of slump I can live with, I mean, if this is the slump, the slump is he's still shooting like 37, 38% from 3. Like, I mean, I can live with this. You need the right leaders. Do you have that? I think Masai is a good leader. I think, in terms of, executives and presidents around the league, I would certainly rank him top 5. I think Bobby Webster is certainly in my top 7 to top 10, general managers. That's solid. Darko Rajakovic, we'll see. It remains to be seen. I cannot make a conclusive case about him. But man, I think they spent so long hiring this guy, and they're asking him to replace a guy who's a former coach of the year, one of the more in-demand coaches in the NBA, in Nick Nurse, regardless of how last year it turned out. I think they did their due diligence on him. I think they figured out, who he is as a person. And I think who he is as a person is already paying dividends to how some players are performing. I'm very curious to see how it will continue at the end. But I wouldn't be surprised if once you get rid of Siakam, like if you do, that he will be able to install his actual offense, like the offense he wants to play. I think you'll see more of an identity, and only then can you have the full flow, because it seems like the Raptors as an organization, and specifically Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster, are more in line with, okay, let's move the ball, let's try to implement this motion offense, let's try to go for this European offense. And it seems like they have a superstar slash star slash all-star slash all NBA guy who's not really bought into that and is going to kind of play his own game. So, okay, that's fine. We'll play that way until you're traded, and then we can certainly explore going the other way. Now, why might the Raptors want to implement this type of offense? And this is the final point: the analytics advantage. Now, look, analytics are looking always to point out market inefficiencies, and market inefficiencies are basically things that other people are not noticing or taking advantage of that you can. So, for instance, a particularly distressed neighborhood that you know is about to go through a major upheaval and a round of investment, properties are probably really cheap there, and that's a market inefficiency. I've spotted several market inefficiencies in my life in certain stocks that maybe are too bearish. So, in basketball, a market inefficiency is basically what is something that is possible to do within the rules and the existing framework of the game as it is right now that maybe other teams aren't doing. The Raptors have always been all about market inefficiencies, okay? Three-point shooting is a massive market inefficiency that the Houston Rockets and the Golden State Warriors really took to the next level in terms of, they figured out the math on it, and they said, okay, 3 points worth more than 2 points. And there aren't a lot of teams or a lot of players that can shoot 60% from two, but there are a lot of players, and there have been increasingly a lot of players that can shoot 40% from three. And so, since most people shoot like below 50% on mid-range twos, okay, let's just shoot threes, and we'll live with 37 to 38% because it's still going to be a slightly more efficient shot. And we'll trust that at the end of the day, the math will work out. A lot of shot quality ultimately has been linked to efficiency. But over the last couple of years, especially, shot quality is no longer linked to efficiency because everyone has figured it out, right? So now you have every single team that's trying to win the exact same way. If you want to win in the NBA, you got to take threes, right? So that's leading to a lot more stars taking mid-range twos, but that's also because they can. And it used to be that you would have role players taking mid-range twos. You don't have too many role players taking mid-range twos anymore. You don't see Malachi pulling up for like 3-2 mid-range twos a game. You see him taking a lot of threes and a lot of layups. Threes and layups, dunks and threes is exactly what the analytics revolution is built on. So if every single team is capitalizing and trying to play the exact same way, and when I look at, shot charts for game by game, it almost looks identical. Yeah, sure, one team might have taken 2 or 3 more mid-range shots than the other, depending on whether they have one of those mid-range assassins like Kevin Durant, DeMar DeRozan, Chris Paul, etc. But most teams kind of tend to be like all in the paint and then all on three. That's kind of just how the game is going right now, right? There's this huge blotchy, if I were to show you a shot chart from like 1996, it does not look like this at all. It's completely all over the place. And I think once everyone figures it out, it's no longer a market inefficiency. It's just how the game is played, right? Imagine, the first guy who ever dunked the basketball. That was a market inefficiency, certainly a lot more efficient than a floater, right? The first guy who decided to shoot not underhand, that's certainly a market inefficiency, probably much more in control or whatever. So, but once the first guy does it, then there is a catch-up period of 3 to 4 years once it becomes broadly accepted, and now everyone's doing it. So now the Warriors are basically having to watch teams that are out-warrioring them, right? So now if you're the Toronto Raptors, you need to figure out what is the next market inefficiency. And I think the Raptors have figured this out. So I'm going to share that with you as the final parting note of this video. And I hope that you will leave a comment and like this video, because I don't want to say this took a lot of work, but it did take a lot of thought and a lot of breath to lay out. And I hope you got a lot from it. So the Raptors market inefficiency is 2 things. Number 1, passing. And number 2, positionless defenders, switchable positionless defenders. There aren't a lot of teams that field the size on the wings and guard positions and big positions that the Raptors do. I mean, a good example of this naturally is the OKC Thunder. Of course, if recent news about Josh Giddey is true, they are going to take a massive L in terms of their development pipeline. But I will say that the Orlando Magic and the Toronto Raptors, Jeff Weltman, Masai Ujiri, handshake, are on the cusp of changing how teams defend. and how teams play. And ultimately, for the Magic, they have a bigger talent pool of losing players from lottery picks, right? Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, etc. But at the end of the day, if Scotty Barnes ends up becoming by far the best player in that heap, then it won't matter how much depth you have, because at the end of the day, a superstar is worth much more than 2 all-stars, in my opinion. So the Raptors have a bit of a head start on this because they've been trying to implement this before it became a thing. And because market trends are sometimes that until it is properly implemented, other teams don't try to play catch up, you're still seeing teams draft players at the wing position who are 6'4", right? The Utah Jazz. Like, I mean, even super smart Danny Ainge is not necessarily building a roster this way, right? I mean, you have really smart coaching there that is preaching ball movement. So you have that. Certainly passing is becoming a big part of it. But I think that if you look at this is an example of why Canada and USA are playing further behind the world. And I think passing and motion offense is the answer. European offense is, simply put, more efficient. AAU, high school, college basketball in the United States, and of course, NBA, pro basketball is just not as efficient. And if you want to look at that, the best example would be the San Antonio Spurs. So this graphic, also coming from Michael McElvey, is every single player who played for the San Antonio Spurs during that era and whether or not playing in that system made them better. 49 of those players had an effective field goal percentage above their career average, and 39 of the 74 players posted their best ever effective field goal percentage season. Here's the question, and this really comes down to, the minuscule, like 1% improvement, and the analytics behind this is all about 1%. Can you be 1% more efficient than the competition? The IBM Watson, the shooting machine and the clock, whatever the Raptors have tried to do, all of these things are trying to leverage 1% advantages. So consider, for instance, and certainly I think Scotty deserves a lot of credit for this, but consider the 2021 NBA draft, right? Scotty Barnes, Evan Mobley, Kate Cunningham, Jalen Green, etc. Guess which one of those players is posting the highest 3-point shooting percentage right now? Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, okay, Paolo not included because I'm on the draft, but Franz Wagner, Jonathan Kuminga, all these guys, this Josh Giddey, this should be the draft that couldn't shoot, basically. Alperen Sengun. None of these guys can shoot. The only guy who can shoot is the one guy that everyone thought would never be able to shoot, and that's Scotty Barnes. So at the end of the day, the Raptors win. They win the battle of development through the first 3 years with Scotty. And Scotty wins because he worked really hard on his jump shot this summer. But at the end of the day, if he continues to shoot 36 to 37%, then the formula works, right? If you can somehow get OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, whatever, these guys, these were not offense players. These were defense players, athletes, long guys with long wingspans that you developed into full players. OG Anunoby, work in progress still. Pascal Siakam, jump shot, still work in progress. But at the end of the day, this is a formula that has worked for you for a while, and people haven't completely caught on to it. But you can see teams trying to draft the next Giannis. They're trying to focus more on wingspan. Wingspan wasn't the hugest consideration in 1999 or 2003. People didn't care about it too much. People cared about height a lot. But now people are caring about switchable positionless defenders, and I think the Raptors have a bit of a head start in this. So now you have the positionless, switchable defenders, plus you have this coach who's preaching passing, and you have an analytical advantage in developing shooters if you in fact believe that, with all the machinery and all of the tracking and all of the stuff that they're doing there. If you have this, then you really would be on the front of the next analytics revolution, which is defense and threes. And so 3 and D, more moving away from dunks and layups, right? Dunks and threes. 3 and D could be the next thing, because at the end of the day, you just faced a team that is trying to do something without the one thing that you have, right? You face the Indiana Pacers. They're doing the whole passing and threes thing, right? You're doing the whole passing and defense thing. And passing and defense, at least for one night, won. right? Granted, the Raptors didn't exactly pass as much as you would have liked them to, but just imagine this thing fully flushed out. A European style motion offense that is predicated on basketball IQ and smart players, led by a selfless leader like Scotty Barnes, right? Where you have an edge in developing shooters. And I do believe that by the end of the year, everyone saying the Raptors can't shoot threes is going to be wrong, because they have brought in people specifically to teach people how to become better shooters. And I think they're going to do it. I think they're going to do it. I think they're going to be able to do that. But you know what? They don't have to teach. They don't have to teach Precious Achua, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes how to guard 4 or 5 positions. And once you figure out how teams are constructing their offenses, you realize that the one type of player that almost every single team needs is the type of player the Raptors have in abundance, which is this 1 through 4, 2 through 5 switchable defender. And so I think that while defensive analytics, and so here really what I'm trying to say is that the defensive analytics are the market inefficiency. The Raptors have figured out, look, there's a lot of things in terms of defensive analytics that come into play: rim percentages, deflections, everything, right? Things that we didn't used to measure 25 years ago, we measure them a lot now, right? 25 years ago, we measured blocks and steals. 45 years ago, we measured nothing. So defense has always been further behind than offense. So what we have realized, or we as the Raptors have realized, is that switchability and versatility on defense is worth more than other things relative to how much people prioritize it. So people will, for instance, still get a big who can't really switch onto the perimeter. They'll still have hang back or drop bigs, or weak side shot blockers, etc., who can't really guard up in the defense. And they'll do that because they value shot blocking, guys like Rudy Gobert, etc. But you put Rudy Gobert 25 feet from the basket, and he's not nearly as effective. And so the Raptors are, they're building this whole program around these guys. And so I can sort of understand, like from the perspective of, do you want Pascal Siakam? Well, the question is, how many Pascal Siakams are there in the NBA? I mean, this guy is a guy who can actually guard guards. Like it's sort of an understated part of his game, but he could, in theory, guard guards. He could, in theory, shoot threes. He's not shooting threes. He's not guarding guards very well, but this is the type of player. Pascal is the prototype. Pascal is the prototype. Scotty Barnes is the 3.0 version, right? It's what you're trying to build up to. And if you could ever get one and the other clicking at the same time, if you can get the buy-in, if you could actually get this to work around Pascal, OG, Scotty, if Scotty can take a step without Siakam being hurt, and if Siakam can continue to be like a, kind of all-star level player without Scotty's development being hurt, if you can somehow blend all of this together, then you have the size that the Magic have, but then you also have more because you have top-end talent that the Magic don't have. You know what the most disheartening part about the Raptors losing to the Orlando Magic was? In theory, the Raptors have the 2 best players. They have Pascal Siakam and they have Scotty Barnes. They didn't play like it that game, and you lose. The depth overwhelms you. But what the Raptors lack right now is 2 stars who can't really they can't seem to play the same game together well, right? One plays well, the other plays poorly. One plays well, the other one plays poorly. And what you don't have is depth. Over a period of a year, maybe you swap out the guy who can't play well with the other guy, or you get buy-in where they both play well. That's one thing. Number 2, you develop the depth. So next year, this time, I believe you will be looking at the first year of what could be a 10-year vision of dominance. I don't know if Pascal Siakam's going to be there. I don't know that. What I do know is that Darko Rajakovic will be there. OG Anunoby and Scotty Barnes will be there. And Masai Ujiri, Bobby Webster, they will be there. So that is my video essay. Very long. Hopefully made sense. 50 comments here. Let me get to a few of them. Terrible bet. Don't do it. As a fellow European who has seen the game degenerate, I'm so relieved that Rob is talking about this. Yeah, absolutely. Analytics revolution is based on casuals analyzing data. Let's not get things twisted, Rob. Some of us spent a decade learning this skill. Well, which skill? Basketball or analytics? Why can't Scotty be a superstar with Dennis and Pascal? Did Dennis take away LeBron's star power? Garbage takes. Well, Bert, I mean, if you're comparing Scotty Barnes to LeBron James, then that's a garbage take. I completely agree, Felicia. He does. And he needs the reps. And so does Grady. And so do OG. All of them do. Anyways, take care, guys. Have a great one. Have a great day. Good luck to the Raptors against Chicago Bulls. I'm looking forward to it. And I'll see you after the post game live. Peace.